Dimitri stepped forward into the light of the foyer, bringing the pistol into view. "I'm sorry," he said. Grey Wolf did not put up his hands. He did not retreat through the door behind him. He did not plead for Dimitri to stop. He met Dimitri's gaze and held it unflinching, awaiting his fate. "I'm sorry," Dimitri said again, and then he pulled the trigger. Grey Wolf's eyes widened as the bullet entered his chest. He fell to his knees, reaching an imploring hand out to his killer. Another blast sounded in the foyer, the room lighting up in a brilliant flash of white. Grey Wolf fell backwards, his back hitting the door behind him to hold him up in a kneeling position. He let out a sigh and slid sideways to the floor, the wounds in his back leaving a smear of red on the front door. His crumpled form heaved its final breaths, and then was still. Dimitri dropped the gun, not hearing the metallic clank as it hit the floor. His face was contorted in grief and pain. He begged Grey Wolf for his forgiveness, and took a step towards his lifeless body. Then he staggered and steadied himself against the wall. He felt a tingling sensation growing in his chest. He unbuttoned his shirt and looked down at his skin. The tattoos were receding from the center of his chest, a ripple of black ink pushing back the borders of the shimmering images. He watched as his chest returned to the original color of his white skin. He turned to the mirror on the wall and watched the region of pure white skin continue to grow. He fingered the bare skin, wanting to touch the returning purity, and then he felt it. He felt as if a tempered knife had plunged into the epicenter of this receding circle of tattoos. His heart, his lungs, his soul. They burned with a fire more intense than any he had experienced before. He fell backwards in agony, writhing on the floor as the fire raced across the unmarked skin of his chest. He grit his teeth against the pain, the veins in his neck and temples protruding, and then let out a scream that tore his throat. Black ink spread outwards from the source of the pain, filling in the space of white skin left by the retreating images. It spread until it covered the breadth of his chest, stretching down in a triangle towards his groin. The ink shifted and morphed, filling in details of fur and teeth. Twin 16-point stars appeared on either side of his chest, the ranking stars of a red mafia boss. Ears grew from the spreading blackness, a broad furry neck, and a mouth agape and hungry. The obsidian face of a wolf took form on Dimitri's chest as he writhed on the floor, screaming. The final details were finished on the tattoo, and he was left panting for breath. He raised his head from the floor to look down at his chest, seeing the massive face of the wolf covering his skin, and let his head drop back to the floor. He glanced over at the body of Grey Wolf lying motionless by the door, and let out a scream of agony more horrid than any he had uttered during the intense pain of the curse. Tears escaped the corners of his eyes, rolling down the sides of his face to drip off his ears and onto the floor. He remained lying on the ground, weeping. Dimitri paused in his story, his voice breaking. He shut his eyes against the wetness brewing within them, exposing the lupine pupils tattooed on his eyelids. Grey Wolf had been like father to me. He took me in. He gave me place in this new world. He gave me power and respect, and I killed him. The wolf tattoo is a constant reminder of that night, and Grey Wolf's silent stare haunts me more than any death cry. I'm sorry, Mr. Tishenko. Dimitri shook his head. Please, let us continue your story. There was an extended silence, as if both men were at a loss for words. Baker shifted in his seat and scratched his beard. So then you were the new boss of your organization after what happened? He asked. Yes, I was new leader. Other members began calling me Obsidian Wolf. Obsidian Wolf? Dimitri shrugged. People had called old boss Grey Wolf after I started this when I was child. I was new boss. With color of tattoos, it was natural name choice, yes? Baker remembered the lupine eyelids and the description of the wolf tattooed on Dimitri's chest, and he nodded in agreement. So what happened next? What I learned as time went on, Mr. Baker, was that curse was slowly killing me. Tattoos were toxic, and they were poisoning my body. How did you find out? I had been ill for a long time, but realization came when tattoos spread to my face. I remembered they had happened. Dimitri stood in his victim's kitchen, looking down the smoking barrel of his pistol at the body below him. He placed his gun on the kitchen table and sat down, waiting for the new tattoo to appear. He felt the familiar sensation begin in his neck, and then screamed in agony as the fire spread up the right side of his face. He lurched out of the chair and landed on the floor, clawing at his cheek as the black image began to grow underneath the skin. He smelled burning hair, and looked to see his own hair spreading across the floor around his head. Then the vision from his right eye went black as the swelling forced it closed. He scrambled to his feet and ran to the mirror in the foyer. He let out an agonized cry as he saw his reflection. The tattoo spread up the side of his face, wedging into his hair. He was bald where the ink had appeared, shimmering black amongst the light brown of the remaining hair. The surrounding skin was red and swollen, his eyelids bloated and squeezed shut. So your hair fell out wherever the tattoos touched? Asked Baker. Dimitri nodded, rubbing his now bald, blackened head. Must be toxic, yes? After that, I became very ill. I was dying. Was there any way to break the curse? Grey Wolf had told me I would bear curse until I chose new heir. As new boss, I could name heir and pass curse along, but then curse would never end. It would only lead to more killing, more pain and nightmares. I would not pass this on. You never named an heir? Dimitri's answering smile was cold and humorless. There were no heirs. What do you mean? I killed them, Mr. Baker. I made sure curse would not pass on. The Obsidian wolf hunted, and when it was done, there was no one left with enough knowledge or power to run Red Mafia organization. Baker was silent for a long moment before he asked his next question. So the curse stayed with you? Because of those killings, my whole body is now covered with tattoos. They continue to poison me. I will die in this prison, Mr. Baker, and curse will die with me. Baker sat staring at Dimitri for a long moment, his mouth drooping into a slight frown. Now that you have heard true tale, do you still find fairy tale-like quality to it? Am I still a tragic figure that readers will relate to? He offered Baker a smile. Baker cocked his head, and his returning grin was small. I want to thank you for sharing your story with me, Mr. Tishenko. But story is not complete, Mr. Baker. Baker raised an eyebrow. If you are going to tell my story to others, you must be able to describe what I have become, yes? You must see the images that mark my body. Dimitri looked at Baker's widened eyes and nodded. He returned the black phone to the wall beside him. He stood up from his chair and unbuttoned the front of his orange jumpsuit. He let the clothing fall to the floor and exposed the flesh beneath. His skin was an intricate black maze of 16-point stars, chains, crosses, and skulls. His chest was covered with the face of a wolf, its eyes the ranking stars in his chest. The mouth, agape and hungry, was filled with razor-sharp teeth. There was a firebird on his back, a crown on his shoulder, and a church growing at the side of his ribs bearing 12 steeples. Head to toe was covered with the obsidian mosaic that mirrored Dmitri Tishenko's life in the Red Mafia.